When a young mother and daughter vanished after a routine trip to the store, those who knew them had only one suspect in mind. But when someone who's meant to protect and serve is the one on the wrong side of the law, uncovering the truth is easier said than done. This is the Case Remains podcast, episode 9, The Unsolved Murder of Rosa Delgado and the Disappearance of Rosita Camacho. It was 1992 in Hartford, Connecticut, when 16-year-old Rosa Delgado noticed a policeman looking at her from his patrol car, driving back and forth as she sat on the steps of her sister's apartment. That policeman was Julio Camacho, a married 32-year-old father. His wife Deborah was also in the police force, and it was a second marriage for both of them. In spite of this, Julio soon began a romantic relationship with Rosa, and a year after they met on June 7, 1993, Rosa gave birth to a little girl. She was also named Rosa, but to avoid any confusion, her family called her Rosita, a name that translates as Little Rose. For the sake of ease, I'll also be referencing her as Rosita throughout this episode. Rosa's relationship with Julio quickly deteriorated after Rosita was born, though Julio would still go by the house and remained in regular contact with Rosa and their daughter, visiting them during his midnight shifts at work and calling them on a daily basis. But times were tough for the young woman, still just a teenager herself, now with a baby to raise. Needing financial support, Rosa applied for state benefits, and as a result, the state ordered Julio to pay child support for Rosita, totaling just under $200 a week. And Rosita wasn't the only child Julio had to support. As well as children from his first marriage, he was financially supporting his wife Deborah's children as well. Julio had also fathered a child with another woman he'd met out on patrol, a 22-year-old named Celeste Morales. Their son, Julio Jr., was born in 1992, and 4 years later, when Celeste filed for child support, Julio was ordered to pay $600 a month. Having to pay out thousands of dollars each month, it wasn't long until Julio fell into financial difficulties. By 1997, Rosa was 21 years old and still living with relatives in Hartford, with Rosita, by then aged 4, and a 5-month-old daughter. On October 24th, Rosa left the baby with her sister so that she and Rosita could walk to a nearby shop. She had only $10 with her and was planning on picking up a few essentials, including milk and nappies. Later, a witness reported seeing Rosa talking to Julio on a street corner in the Parkville neighborhood, just outside his mother's apartment and about a block away from Rosa's home in Park Street. The owner of the shop, just 4 blocks away from their home, said that Rosa had come in with Rosita at about 4:45 p.m. After buying milk and diapers, the pair left in the direction of their home. This was the last time that they were ever seen alive. Naturally, suspicion immediately fell on Julio Camacho, but it was several weeks before police questioned him in regards to the case. By the time Rosa and Rosita disappeared, Julio had been with the Hartford police for almost 10 years. Picking up teenagers while on patrol aside, his work record wasn't exactly stellar. He was charged with third-degree assault in 1989, less than a year after he joined the police, after allegedly hitting his first wife. He was subsequently fired, but was reinstated once the charges against him were dropped. Despite his numerous infidelities, Deborah and Julio were still together, although she was experiencing some problems of her own. Just a few days before Rosa and Rosita were last seen, police were called to Julio and Deborah's home for a medical assist. There, they found Deborah with a suicide note, but managed to take her service pistol away from her. After that, she took extended medical leave from work, officially due to problems with her back. She never returned to the police. Julio was also granted leave so that he could look after his wife, but he abruptly resigned in 1998, about a year after Rosa and Rosita went missing. After resigning, he received access to a lump sum pension payment, said by some to be in the region of $40,000. Rosa's family said that Deborah had called the house multiple times just before she and Rosita disappeared, and that she had also complained to them that she was upset at the fact that she had to work to support children that her husband had as a result of his affairs. Deborah, however, claimed to have never spoken to or met Rosa, and insisted that there was no feud of any kind going on at the time of her disappearance. A month after Rosa and Rosita vanished, Camacho asked the court to cancel the order for child support until Rosita's paternity could be determined. He neglected to mention that both she and her mother were missing. Rosa's sister, Antonia, had been receiving the money as she was the one who financially supported Rosa and her children. At the time, she stated her disbelief that only a month after her sister and her niece had vanished, Julio was taking her to court over money. Nevertheless, the petition was granted, and Julio's weekly payments were reduced to $159 a week that would be held in escrow until Rosita was found. According to Rosa's family, as soon as Rosa and Rosita went missing, Julio stopped calling by the house. 2 months had passed when, 180 miles away, duck hunters made a terrible discovery on a trip to Columbia Lake, New Jersey. A woman's body was found floating in 3 feet of water, right where the lake joins the Delaware River. Without a head or hands, police were at a loss as to who the woman might be. The spot is rural and heavily wooded, yet easily reached by the I-80, which is the second longest interstate highway in America. Covering close to 3,000 miles, it goes through several major cities and 11 states. Unfortunately, this combination of factors make it a popular dumping spot for bodies. Another Jane Doe, who became known as Tiger Lady, had also been found less than half a mile away 6 years prior in 1991. Aged just 14 to 17 and standing only around 5 feet tall, her namesake stemmed from a crouching Bengal tiger tattoo that ran down the calf of her left leg. Just a few miles up from the lake, Princess Doe was found in 1982, bludgeoned to death and dumped in a cemetery. Her face had been beaten beyond all recognition. Neither Tiger Lady nor Princess Doe have ever been identified, but there was one Jane Doe who would finally get her name back. Once they got wind of the lady in the lake, Hartford police began to suspect that they may have discovered the remains of Rosa Delgado. But because the body had been found out of state, identification was far from straightforward, with teams from 2 jurisdictions over 150 miles apart having to work together to crack the case. After 2 years, it was determined through DNA that the body did in fact belong to Rosa, though her head and hands have sadly never been recovered. That still left the question, where was Rosita Camacho? While researching this case, I found a local news site that mentioned Columbia Lake being completely drained as part of a federal missing person search in 2000. If it did happen, it doesn't look like it ever hit the mainstream media. Though the site doesn't mention the person they were looking for, 2000 was the same year that the FBI stepped in the search for Rosita, and considering the whereabouts of her mother's remains, it seems likely that they were searching for her. In 2018, the decision was made to permanently drain the lake so they could remove an obsolete dam and restore the general health of the waterway. No other bodies were found during this process, which was completed by the end of summer last year. Just a couple of months after the search of the lake, Julio Camacho made his way to trial, but it wasn't for the disappearance of his daughter or former girlfriend. Instead, Julio was accused of handcuffing and raping 2 women over the back of his police cruiser in 1995 and 1997. He even led one of the women away in handcuffs in front of her very own children. Once the accusations came to light, 3 other women came forward, saying that Camacho had forced them to give him sexual favors under the threat of arrest, though these charges were never pursued. Neither were the accusations that Camacho used to supply drugs to sex workers in the area. As is so often the frustrating reality in rape cases, Camacho's lawyer, public defender Thomas Dennis, tried to discredit the women by asking why they hadn't come forward at the time of the attacks. This in spite of the fact that Camacho wasn't the only Hartford police officer to be accused of on-duty sexual crimes. In fact, he was one of 7, investigated for 14 incidents between them. In an attempt to lessen his sentence, Dennis also argued that Julio would be in danger in prison because he would be known as an ex-policeman, and that he had rescued people from car accidents and fires while in the line of duty, not to mention the money that he'd raised for charity. Though the charges had nothing to do with the 1997 disappearances, federal prosecutor James Glasser was about to drop a bombshell on the case. During the rape trial, Glasser publicly announced that he believed that Julio Camacho was responsible for Rosa's murder and the disappearance of his 4-year-old daughter. He made the accusation in court, where, after naming him as a suspect in Rosa's murder, Glasser also revealed that during a search of Camacho's house in 1998, the FBI had found a number of suspicious items, including a wire that looked like it had been made into a garrote found underneath his car seat. Not only that, but the lining of his trunk had been removed and replaced with carpet. The metal bottom of the trunk looked like it had been sanded clean. Police also found a number of guns and a hatchet, but were unable to get blood evidence from any of the items, which had all been thoroughly cleaned. Police obtained a warrant to seize Camacho's car and cut it into pieces to see if any DNA evidence may have made its way into the crevices of the vehicle, but still there was nothing to be found. Despite the protests of Camacho's lawyer, Glasser continued to reveal information of the search, saying that police had also found a map of New Jersey with notes tracing a route to the area where Rosa's body was found, among a selection of books about serial killers and murder, one with a section on using decapitation and amputation as a way of concealing the identity of a corpse. Glasser said that they had caught Camacho out in numerous lies, and that they'd noticed several deep scratches on his body right after the disappearance of Rosa and Rosita. He said that Camacho hadn't been at work at the time of the crime, and that he'd even asked his brother to provide him with a false alibi. The judge in the rape case, Thomas P. Smith, decided to hold Camacho without bail based on the brutality of the crimes and the discovery of 2 illegal sawn-off shotguns at Camacho's Cromwell home. He refused to comment on the 1997 disappearances. In 2001, when he was 40 years old, Camacho pled guilty to both rapes and was given the maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison. Despite Glasser's revelations at trial, there was no further action taken in the case of Rosa and Rosita. Some reports say that the FBI joined the investigation after receiving information that Rosita may have been in Puerto Rico. Although the reason they thought this has never been made clear, it has been suggested that Julio has family over there. That same year, a $100,000 reward was offered for any information in the murder of Rosa Delgado and the disappearance of Rosa Camacho, with half the money put forward by the FBI and the other half authorized by the governor at the time, John G. Rowland. As it later turned out, Rowland was no stranger to corruption and has since spent 2 stints in federal prison himself for a list of crimes including tax fraud, conspiracy, falsifying records in a federal investigation, and causing illegal campaign contributions. 3 billboards advertising the reward, 1 in Spanish and 2 in English, were placed in 2 different locations in Hartford. Put up around the busy time of Thanksgiving, it was hoped that they might get some traction, but unfortunately they didn't lead to any new tips. Around 3 years into his stint in prison, Julio's relationship with Deborah broke down, though the 2 remained legally married, and after 8 years he was let out, remaining on supervised release until 2012. As for Rosa and Rosita, the case had gone cold until early January of 2016. A forensic team from the FBI visited Julio's old address in Cromwell, Connecticut, and began to dig up the front yard. Notably, the local police weren't present for the search. Julio no longer lived at the home, which had burned down in 2003, a new house built in its place, and it's not clear what led the FBI to search the ground for clues. Whatever the reason, though, they came out with nothing. A local paper contacted Deborah, who was living in Virginia at the time, to ask her opinion about the dig that was taking place. Deborah said that she didn't think the FBI would find anything on the property, and that she would have known if someone had been buried in her front yard. She added that not a day went by that she didn't wonder what became of little Rosita. Deborah claimed to no longer be involved with Julio, although at the time of the search he was also living in Virginia, courtesy of the Norfolk City Jail, where he'd landed himself for failure to pay child support for children from one of his previous relationships. According to Deborah, he'd come to Virginia in an attempt to reconnect with a daughter that they had together. The daughter in question posted online in 2016, saying that while it was true that Julio was in Virginia, it was Deborah who had asked him to come. He had called her once he was released from prison for the rape charges, and once he went to see her, the two had in fact gotten back together. Speaking in the online post, she said,
"I avoided both of them like the plague until I could find a way out of there. Even though Deborah taught me for those 10 years that he was a murderer, a rapist, and a child molester, that if I ever came home and the door of our home was cracked open, just assume she was dead and call the police and tell them Julio did it. Can you imagine being 8 years old and hearing all these disgusting, dirty secrets your family knows about your own biological father? That's what it's like being his child. I really feel for my siblings. I really do. I wish things had been better for all of us. There's so much more about him that people didn't talk about to the police or should have when things occurred, before the statute of limitations. Not regarding the Delgados, but his own biological family and other children. My mother is incredibly violent and unstable on her own. But together, her and Julio are terribly violent and manipulative towards each other. What a fucking combination. My mother disregarded all of us, her children, for Julio. I mean, my maternal siblings begged for her to leave him. She never did. They all ran away when I was 6 to 8 years old. They were preteens. Both of them were atrocious to my siblings growing up. They had no chance at survival or a normal life in that house. She's sick and demented, and so is he. I guess they're perfect for each other.
The daughter, who was of high school age, said that Julio didn't actually spend any time with her, nor had she wanted him to, and that she got the impression that he was running away from another crime that he'd committed back in Connecticut. She said that Julio was still on bail in Connecticut at the time he came to Virginia, so wasn't technically allowed to leave the state. When I spoke to Julio and Deborah's daughter, she told me that his parole officer would call before he was coming for a visit, and that her father would simply make his way back to Connecticut for the appointment. Eventually, though, his failure to pay child support caught up with him, and he ended up being incarcerated in Virginia for 2 years. He's managed to stay out of prison since, although he remains on the sex offenders register for life. His registered address is still in Virginia, and though she no longer speaks to them, Julio and Deborah's daughter believes that they are still together to this day. No charges have ever been made in the murder of Rosa Delgado or the disappearance of Rosita Camacho. Today, Rosita would be 25, 4 years older than her mother was when she was so callously killed, not even granted the dignity of being buried in one piece. Though decades have now passed, those that knew Rosita still cling on to hope, praying that their little Rose may one day come back home. Thank you for listening to episode 9 of the Case Remains podcast. If you'd like to stay in touch, please give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram, where you'll find us with the handle Case Remains, or head over to our website www.caseremains.com, where you'll find write-ups on missing persons cases and unsolved mysteries. I'd also like to say a big thank you to everyone who's taken the time to leave us an iTunes review. If you've got a moment to spare, please go ahead and leave one too. It's always great to hear your feedback, and it helps others to find the show. Until next time, stay safe.